Jack, my great Uncle Jack, has found a new home. I first visited Uncle Jack with my father 20 odd years ago, where he took me to the cemetery in Mazingarbe in France and showed me this enormous line of white graves, picked out Uncle Jack's, and we made some photographs of it. And somewhere missing off the table here, I had something I was going to give to Jack, but it's vanished, which was the history book of his life, his trip to Hainan province. He was an extraordinary man. He was a Winchester scholar. Winchester is our foremost private school in England. He got the first scholarship of the year he went there. He was a very bright man. He then went into the army because everybody had to, and he went into the engineers. And he was called on to go to Hainan Island, which is a very obscure island off the southeast coast of China, and for the British military do a survey. Now, you might think he'd go to an island and do a survey. Well, the inhabitants of that island at that time were head-eating, head-hunting savages. So if you read his diary, which I had a copy of here just now, and which I'm going to present to Jack when I find it, is a detailed history of how he went to that island, the small group of troops that he took, the locals that he enrolled to help him, and how every day he had to get up in the morning at about 4 o'clock to start the 3-hour process of packing up camp and saddling the horses and moving on just a few miles each day to continue the survey. What they did, what they encountered, who and what they shot, it's all detailed, quite extraordinary. The original diary is manuscript, and when he got back, he made a typescript. I happen to know that there are 2 typescripts in existence. Ours, which we've given to the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, along with the manuscript, and there appears to be one in Cornell, but they're not very good at displaying. So I have put it on our website, on my family website, and there it's available for anybody who'd like to know more about Uncle Jack. He was recalled into the army and went off to World War I, where he was killed very sadly in France in 1914, and this is the memorial portrait, how I checked, no, 1917, which is his memorial portrait, and I'm so happy that it's found a new home with Jack. Jack, there he is. Now, he wasn't the only bright person in the family. There was an extraordinarily gifted generation at that time. But it all started with Frederick William Simonds, who, as a young man, the second son of a swashbuckling, if I can get that word out, entrepreneur. It was something in the nature of the family of that era, because Frederick's father was a Russia trader. A Russia trader is somebody who trades with Russia. But hang on, this was in the era of the Napoleonic Wars. So trading with Russia was quite an interesting thing to do. And he seems to have been the sole supplier of tallow. What's tallow? Wax. Pig wax. Very necessary for making cartridges to the state of Russia at the time. He imported tallow from all over Europe, shipped it through, funnily enough, the Isle of Wight, where we all have connections, to Russia, and he made a fortune doing it. His second son, Frederick William, came over to the States in, I think, 1841. There we are, aged just 22, having already travelled the whole way around Europe. Now, think about it, this is before your Civil War. Life then was pretty tough. So to be travelling around Europe and going to live in the States, aged 22 in 1841, is very adventurous. He then married a lady, a girl, whom he met either on the boat or very soon afterwards, from a very prominent family here. And, what's her name? Sophie Elizabeth de Luze. And she was from the Ogden family here, and as a result, they had very good connections. Her father was the Swiss consul in New York, for 30 years. So he arrived here, and your surveys that you have of the population, which are called what? Census. Thank you. Show that he was living in his friend's house at the time of the census, and therefore he was being supported clearly by the people he met. And he was set up as a commission trader. You might know better than I what that is, but he was the commission trader in Boston. And clearly made a success. They had 10 children, 8 of them sons. They were busy in those days. We then move, in no particular order, to the third son. I've got the generations all mixed up on here.
Henry Adolphus.
Yes, the third son was Henry Adolphus. Thank you. Henry Adolphus, 1855 to 1904. That puts you in the era. Henry Adolphus was the father of the one we all know, Gramsci. I won't go into Gramsci's family. You know much more about it than I do. But I'm very glad to have been able to list it all out, because I did discover that not everybody knows everybody. So,
a round of applause for
well, thank you everybody for feeding me in the bits of information to write it all up. It was
Thank you.
quite a long undertaking, longer than I expected when I started.
People see their names without photos on the tree.
Next issue. See you later. Are you going somewhere? The second son was Louis de Luze Simonds. Now, Louis de Luze was my great-grandfather, and out on the table outside, there was a little blue handwritten letter from Louis de Luze Simonds to his uncle in the UK. Dear uncle, and I'll paraphrase it briefly, you have tried to persuade me to come back to the UK, to come to the UK, to leave my family and come to the UK. I'm sorry I turned you down. I've changed my mind. Your arguments are very persuasive. I don't know what they were. And I have decided that I will come back and live in the UK. I know nothing about brewing, I know nothing about your family, but I'm sure I will grow to learn about it. And that is typical of the approach of our family then and now. They just get on and do things. So thankfully, Louis came back to the UK and rekindled the family there, because there were no sons to take on the family business. Shortly afterwards, Fred, the fifth son, also returned. But Louis was the driving force and took over the brewery, made a big success, and more importantly, had my grandfather. The other bright one, and again I had a piece of paper here, was Viscount Gavin Turnbull Simonds. He was the last proper Lord Chancellor of England. And by proper I mean that is before they separated the roles of legal and executive. He was appointed by Churchill, and he was the head of the judiciary, which I think you would probably call Chief Justice. At the time of the last coronation of our current Queen, he stood behind the Queen's shoulder during her coronation, and I have some wonderful photographs of that. The coronation event is commemorated in a stained glass window at Canterbury Cathedral, where just behind the Queen you can see my Uncle Gavin. We go to see Gavin. Now, absolutely, just to make the point that this family was so gifted, the fourth son was Commander Harry Duncan Simonds. Duncan is a very common name. My father was Duncan in the family. He was the youngest son. He was sent off to Portsmouth College, which is a naval college, and to cut a very long story short, a long time later he was the commander of HMS Warspite in 1914. HMS Warspite was one of our huge World War I battleships. So he did very well in the Navy. He also did very well to escape the Warspite when she was torpedoed. He was one of only 34 survivors of the many thousands of crew on a battleship. The last one I wanted to...
Raymond, the Portland connection.
Oh yes. That was in the First World War.
Second World War. Second World War. He was over
That
here.
was in the First World
Okay,
War, but
fine.
he survived.
Okay, very good.
He then went and became a director of the brewery, where he was responsible for developing the transport systems from horses to trucks. That was a revolution. And in the Second World War, he volunteered, and by virtue of his age, he wasn't put into the front line. He was, however, sent to the USA, where he spent many years based in this town, directing and managing the relationship between the British and American navies.
Isn't it extraordinary? He was here. He was in Portland, yeah.
Ah, pay attention, there's a test at the end. Commander Harry Duncan Simonds. 1886 to